Hello everyone, I'm Zoidberg and welcome to this week's UK Gaming Network podcast, where you'll hear our opinions on a whole host of gaming topics, including the latest games. Crucially, we won't get upset if you disagree with what we have to say. We started UKGN because we were fed up of reading gaming websites and magazines who took their own opinions far too seriously. We've been talking about this again recently thanks to the importance major publishers have put on sites like Metacritic, websites that scour the internet looking for every review that they can find for a specific product and then assigning a score based on how many good, bad or indifferent ones they find. It's always fun to have a look at, especially at the retro side of things, and see what was considered the best game on an older system, or the best games in a specific genre. Unfortunately, companies like EA, Ubisoft and Activision all look to receiving a 90 plus score on Metacritic as the holy grail during development, and view anything less than 80 as a failure. Out of the big releases so far in 2019, only Resident Evil 2 and Sekiro have hit that score of 90 or over. These scores ultimately mean nothing if you're not into those types of games. You shouldn't let these sites, or anyone for that matter, stop you from having your own opinion. Personally, I think Final Fantasy VII is the most disappointing game I ever bought, and I've squeezed more hours of entertainment out of the most average racing games simply because I love racing games, and I really enjoyed Aliens Colonial Marines. Does this mean that I'm wrong? Of course it doesn't. It's merely my opinion, and a person's opinion can never be wrong. We should all be free to make up our own minds about what's good and what's not. If you play a game and love it, then that's brilliant. Who cares what anyone else thinks? There's not been a lot of actual news this week due to the long Easter weekend, just lots of rumours and speculation. So instead, we'll start with a couple of early looks at games that you can play now. Dreams is Media Molecule's long-awaited follow-up to Little Big Planet that was first announced in 2013, and it's now available on the PlayStation 4 store in what the developers are calling Creator Early Access. It gives you access to all of the creative tools that the game will have, so that you can let your imagination run wild, with the story mode being saved for the full release later in the year. Even if you don't want to create anything yourself, there's plenty of other people's creations to have a look at. There's even a remake of PT that you can play. Even at this stage, it's all got the same level of charm that Little Big Planet was known for. Nintendo seem to be the only platform holder that actually still care about demos, and over on the Switch store you can download an early look at Box Boy and Box Girl right now. It lets you play through the first chapter of both single player and co-op, and it's well worth a look for fans of puzzle games. The full game will be released next month. Also announced this week is that Ubisoft's cel-shaded first-person shooter 13 is getting a remake. And we've always thought that if you're going to remake something, why remake a game that was already brilliant, when you could try improving something that had potential but fell short? The original game was released back in 2003 and had a brilliant cel-shaded look that made it look like a living comic. The remake is due to be released on the 13th of November this year, which puts it in direct competition with Jedi Fallen Order. There's no details as to whether it's a straight HD reskin or a full remake. We hope it's the latter. Available on April 30th is the anniversary update for Sea of Thieves, celebrating 1 year since the game was released. This will add a full-blown adventure mode called Tall Tales Shores of Gold, as well as a PvP section called The Arena, which will allow well-organised crews to battle against each other. You could argue that these features should have been there at release, but the game has always been exceptionally well made and is lots of fun to play with a group of friends. And let's face it, you can't complain about free. Although there wasn't a lot of news, there were a lot of games to play this week. First up is God's Trigger, which is a good looking and playable Hotline Miami clone. It's got a great pulpy comic book visual style that complements the story, and it gets the basics right, but it unfortunately overly complicates things, adding too many controls, meaning that when you're in the thick of the action you can quite easily find yourself doing the wrong move. Also, it's a game clearly designed for co-op, as switching between the characters when you're playing solo can be a bit of a pain. In addition to the story, there's also an arcade mode that brings excellent randomly generated challenges which keep you playing. It's out now on Xbox, PS4 and PC. Katana Zero came out on the Switch and PC. It's a brilliant and challenging platform action game with fantastic pixel art graphics. The story is surprisingly dark and complex and has some great dialogue throughout. and all of it is skippable if you so wish. There's a lot of repetition as you keep failing each level, but when you finally succeed, you'll feel elated when you do so, and you're also treated to a replay of how well you did. Although watching these replays at the end of every level is a nice idea, but ends up disrupting the flow of the gameplay. The freedom to experiment and retry the levels in any way you see fit keeps you playing as the difficulty level ramps up. Wargaming.net have finally brought World of Warships to consoles, and it's basically the same as World of Tanks, only with vehicles that are slightly less manoeuvrable. It brilliantly forces newcomers to play matches against bots until they get used to it, and the progression system works incredibly well, meaning that you're never more than a couple of matches away from your next item unlock. Best of all though, the microtransactions are tucked away on a separate menu so that you never even have to visit it unless you want to. It offers a fantastic alternative to the likes of Overwatch, Apex Legends and Fortnite. Jupiter and Mars is the latest game on PlayStation VR, and it's a bizarre combination of Rez and Echo the Dolphin. The biggest problem is that it has no real guidance as to where you're meant to be going or what you're meant to be doing, and the developers don't seem to understand that it takes more than throwing particles at your face to impress us. PlayStation VR has come a long way since its launch, and games like this one just don't cut it anymore. It had potential, but ultimately it's not worth the money. Trooperbrook is a traditional point-and-click adventure game with well-thought-out joypad controls on consoles. It looks fantastic, a bit like a stop-motion movie come to life, and the voice acting and soundtrack are brilliant as well. The characters and locations that you encounter tick every box that you'd expect, and ultimately the story isn't particularly memorable. Another disappointing aspect is that the puzzles themselves aren't particularly difficult to solve, as the inventory interface is a little bit too simplified. When you click on an item, only the items that can be used on it are shown, meaning that you don't really have to think for yourself. Lastly this week we have the Konami Anniversary Arcade Classics Collection, which has been released to celebrate 50 years of Konami. It's really a bare bones package with only a couple of decent games out of the 8 available, and the best thing about it is actually that it features a great in-depth virtual book charting the history of the company. The biggest problem is that they call it Arcade Classics, because where are the real classics like Frogger, Time Pilot, Sunset Riders or even Track and Field? Personally, I would suggest that you wait for the Contra or Castlevania collections that are coming in the next couple of months, as on paper those two look like a far better way of celebrating the anniversary. So we've come to the end of another podcast, hope you enjoyed listening to it. If you're wondering where Mortal Kombat 11 was, we've simply not got it yet, but don't worry, as soon as we do we'll let you know what we think. Not that our opinion matters. We'll be back next week to cast our eye over more gaming releases, including the latest in the acclaimed SteamWorld series. Subscribe to our channel for more from UKGN Network, and why not follow us on Twitter and Facebook for news about any upcoming live streams that we have planned. Thanks for listening, see you next time.